Hello, it's very nice to see you all. First of all, Ellen and I want to acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Gadigal people, and we are from Adelaide, which is Kaurna land, and we really want to send our gratitude and respect to Gadigal and Kaurna elders, thank them for having us on their lands, and to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. We also like to acknowledge that we are all here today on a Saturday for some unknown reason, but the reason is that we're here for the disability community. We all are passionate about providing great support, and the fact that you're here in the room and online, and the fact that Ellen and I are here in a different state on a Saturday shows that we are dedicated to making sure that the disability community live the lives that they want to live and get the support that they want to do that. Just quickly, the perspectives that Ellen and I bring. I'm Elizabeth. I was a support worker for 6 years, and I plan on dipping in and out of support work for the rest of my career to maintain some understanding of what's happening on the ground. I've worked in the disability sector now for 10 years, and I have a little bit of lived experience in that I've lived with chronic pain my whole life and chronic fatigue for the last 7 years. Ellen?
Hi everyone, my name is Ellen. I bring a lived experience of someone who was born with disability, both visible and invisible as well. So I have that experience of having received support, but I've also worked for a number of years in the disability sector. I've also studied in disability as well. So I live, work, study, and all of my friends are in the disability space as well. So it's my life.
Ellen and I lead a project called Quality Disability Support, and we've done so for the last 3 years, which is why we've been asked to talk to you today. And during our presentation, we're going to use both person first and identity first language, sort of as it suits us really. We switch between the two pretty constantly. Ellen?
Pardon?
Do you want to ask the audience the type of support?
Oh, yeah. So we first of all want to start with a question for you guys, which is just around the type of tasks that we do as support workers. So how many of you in the room, put your hand up if you have supported someone to get up in the morning and get dressed, to go to work, to school, to get into the community? I know that I have. How many of us have supported someone to access the community or friendship, to be part of a social activity? And how many of us have supported someone to do medication or manual handling? Yeah, so some of you have done that too. So the reason why I'm asking you that is because these are the common tasks that we often think about when we're talking about support work. But what we want to talk about today is actually the unseen parts of what make good support. And these are often the things that we don't see on paper. They're the things that we often talk about when we're talking to people with disability or listening to stories from people with disability. So we really want to spend a bit of time today talking about those sorts of things, the things that we don't often talk about on paper.
So I'm a lot louder now. There we go. On the tables outside, we've left just one pager, little notes for you to take home today. And these are the key things that we really want you to walk away with. I'm sure that you have these, but we're so passionate about making sure that, especially if you're a non-disabled support worker, disability community and culture is so deep and the history is so broad that having an understanding of the differences and many similarities between you and the people you work for is really vital. So firstly, a recognition that disabled people are not broken and that we are all working within systems and structures that were designed without disabled people in mind, and it's our jobs as support workers to support people to navigate these systems. We want to make sure that you know, that you believe, that you maybe have tattooed somewhere on your body that behaviour is all communication. And I'll talk a bit more about that. We want you to acknowledge that it takes energy to have support workers. You're fantastic people, I have no doubt. But to have people, strangers often in your lives, does take energy and skill. Self-reflecting as a support worker is absolutely key. Where do I come from versus the person that I'm working for, and what parts of my life should I bring into the support, which parts shouldn't I? And overall, our purpose as support workers is to look at disabled people and recognise what they're telling us with and without words, to listen to them properly and deeply, to learn from them, and to believe them when they tell you that something is working or isn't working. So we hear a lot about support workers in the media, and often it's not great. So the things that we see might look like this. You know, investigations. And what I wanted to, and most recently there was one last week that came out about someone being really injured by their support worker. Ellen, I wanted to ask you, what happens, what gets us to this end point of support work where it's not support work anymore, but it's abuse? What do we lose? What happens or what doesn't happen to lead to this?
I think it's important to recognise that what we often see in the media, these are important stories, but they are the tip of the iceberg. And it's really easy for all of us, I include myself in that because I have also been someone who has been a support worker as well. It's really easy for us to say, well, that's not me, I wouldn't be that sort of person. But the thing is that it's a slippery slope in terms of abuse. And so, yes, those stories are the really extreme kinds of ends of abuse. But there's also lots of little subtle ways that people with disability or elderly people are devalued. They're seen as lesser, they're seen as broken, they're seen as people that are tragic, people who need help and therefore don't have value to add to a community. You know, those are the sort of negative messages that we have that sort of, they create this idea that people with disability are lesser than. And I think that then creates all of these little subtle interactions that we're not really aware of when we're talking to people with disability or talking to someone who has a different experience from what we know. So I just want to talk to you for a minute as a woman with disability myself, as someone who's received support. And I just want to make a point to you about the fact that for me as a disabled person, I think it's really important, and it's been most, like, if I think about the great support people that I've had in my life and what makes them good at what they do, it is the fact that they have taken the time to get to know me, but they also recognise that I am living in a world that is designed without considering the needs of people with disabilities. Like, if you look around this room, there are stairs that go up to the stage, for example. There are stairs that go up to the doors over there, as another example. I can't access the hearing loop in this room. And that is not necessarily the fault of the event organisers. It is just the world that we live in. It is the fact that organisations, that buildings are not designed with disabled people in mind. So that's an example of the kind of discrimination I might have to face on a day-to-day basis. And I don't want people to think, oh, that's really sad, oh, I should pity them, because that's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point that I'm trying to make is that all of us in our community have a responsibility to really think about disability as a social experience. So when we are, it's to do with the way that we treat people with disability, it's to do with the way that we value, it's to do with unlearning all of these negative messages that we've had across our lifetime, telling us that disabled people are tragic, that we are broken, that we don't have anything to add to our community. You know, I would like all of us to genuinely believe that disabled people and elderly people are not just loved by their immediate family, and it's not just an obligation in terms of that love, but we can also be people who are valued employees, valued friends, we can be lovers and partners, we can be colleagues, a CEO. You know, these are the types of things that give us value in our community. So I would like us to have hope that we can actually have an inclusive community. And so when I'm thinking about the good support in my life, the people who are the best are the ones who are constantly thinking about critiquing how our community can do better, rather than focusing on how to cure someone of their disability or how to fix someone's disability. And that's really, I know that I've had lots of conversations about this, like I'm an academic in this field, so I talk about this stuff all the time. And I've had lots of conversations where people will often say to me, but that's easy for you to say because you're very articulate, you can communicate, you're highly educated, you're very highly educated, you've got a doctorate for God's sake. But you're not the type of person that I'm working with. I'm working with someone who doesn't use words to communicate. I'm working with someone who has quite significant needs. That's not you. You know, what about those sorts of people? And like I've often had to very gently sort of say, but did that person laugh? Did that person smile? Do they curl their body up? Do they move away? These are all things that we can demonstrate in terms of listening, like in terms of responding. And when we are being really tuned into those sorts of things, that's how we show our respect for them as a human being. And we're actually taking the time to get to know people, and we're seeing them as human equal to us. So I think that there is merit in what I'm saying, not only for me as a disabled person who can speak very articulately, but for all of us in the disability community. So I want to just ask Elizabeth, because I know that you have worked in the industry as a support worker for a number of years, and you started as a really young person in your early 20s. I'm sure you would have some examples of working with people who may not be like me, who may actually have more of that experience of not using words to communicate. Can you talk to me about some of those experiences and what you've learned?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to put that there so it's not so distracting. So my last job as a support worker, I was managing a respite house for kids with disability, and most of these kids didn't use words to communicate or used few words. They used their bodies. And if any of you know people who don't use words to communicate, they can be extremely strong. They use their whole being to tell you what they want. And because still a lot of people don't recognise physical communication as communication, they have to use their whole body to communicate quite forcefully. And so they develop this strength. And I was supporting a young woman who lived with us. Her family were unable to support her at home anymore. So she'd lived with us for about a year. She was over 6 foot tall, and she had that strength. She was 17 years old, tall and incredibly strong. And in a 6-month period when I was working at that respite house, she went from having 2 support workers with her for personal care 3 times a day to having 1 support worker with her and very few injuries afterwards. So when I started, 1 support worker would distract her with her favourite items or some snacks, and the other support worker would remove what she had to wear, which was a suit from ankles to wrists because she picked at her skin, and she also fecal smeared. And so while this support worker was trying to undress this young person, the other support worker would be distracting her, or on some days they would be physically restraining her. This was an approved restrictive practice, I will say. Doesn't mean it was the right way of doing things. So I would end most shifts scratched, bleeding, often covered in someone else's poo. And this happened because this woman had spent her life being defensive, being not listened to, and trying to communicate with people using her whole body. Sorry, my earrings are very loud. But people weren't listening. And so she had to escalate her behaviours of concern to the point where she was deemed, staff were terrified of this young woman. Agency staff were terrified of this young woman. But what she had around her were 3 support workers in particular, and then myself when I joined the team, who properly listened, who would say to her, "Oh, Sally, you're out in the garden with your favourite." She loved making sounds, so she had drums and she had xylophones and she had guitars, and she'd take one of her instruments into the garden and start playing and singing, and we would describe to her what we think she was telling us through her behaviour. "Oh, you're sitting in the sun playing your drums. You look really happy. Would you like me to stay with you, or would you like me to go away?" And she would show us by pulling on our arms to sit down or pushing us away what she wanted. And as she learnt that we would listen to her, we would go away or we would stay with her, the force that she needed got less and less. So at the start when I met her, she would pull you into another room. It was, she wanted you there, but she knew that maybe you wouldn't come with her unless she physically picked you up and put you in that room with her. By the time I left, she was able to gently take our hand or to pat the sort of ground beside her, because she'd learnt that we would listen, and she had built this trust with us. And I think people often say, I'm supporting someone with really complex needs and really high behaviours of concern, and I absolutely believe that people with really complex behaviours, they're doing it there's an unmet need here. So it's our jobs to find what is that unmet need, and how can we support them to find it, and therefore how can we support them to not feel the need to escalate the force of their communication so that it becomes a behaviour of concern. Ellen, you said you have support workers. And sorry, just before I go on, this is just for my story. These are my key messages, that behaviour is so much more than words. You must understand behaviour is communication. And look, sometimes we support people with acquired brain injury, and some of those behaviours can be altered by changes to the brain, and that's something that's specific we can't go into today. But if you assume that someone's behaviour is trying to tell you something, you will be in a much better place to support them. You must get to know the person and earn their respect and their trust. And remember, they've probably had decades of people not listening to them. It's going to take time for them to recognise you're actually listening to them. And watch for changes in behaviour so they don't feel that need to escalate.
Can I add to that?
Of course.
One of the things that I'm hearing also is that, and this is something that I've certainly seen in the industry, and I'm sure it also happens in the aged care industry when working with elderly people, is that it's really easy to get caught up in those negative ideas of that person's just being difficult, or that person's a problem, or that person's giving me the shit today. Excuse me for my language. And it's really easy to set up those sorts of cultural moments where we may not realise that they're culture, but when we're talking to other people about the people that we're working with, it's really easy to absorb those negative messages. And so what I'm hearing in your case is that she didn't have that. She had 3 or 4 people around her who didn't just label her as difficult or as a problem, and actually took the time to get to know who she was as a person and why she was doing the things she was doing and what her needs were. And that's that's a totally different experience to what I've seen in a lot of the disability industry, where it's just so easy to get caught up in the negative messages.
Yeah, when I started at the service and I'd say to people, I'm working at this service, they would all go, ooh. And it was that, it was that house. It was that well-known, terrible, no one had managed it for 6 months. It was the Wild West. So all it takes is create people around someone. All it takes, I make it sound easy, but it really takes time, and it takes building that trust and recognising people do things for a reason. They're not just doing it for no reason. Ellen, I'm really interested in your own experiences as someone who receives support. Say, for example, you have 2 support workers who are going for the same role, and they both come in for an initial shift. What are the factors that take them from someone who you meet for the first time to someone who you employ long term?
I think there's lots of things that I would consider someone who is receiving support. Obviously, the first thing is working out what the task is, and I can give you a very recent example where I was looking for support workers who would help me to get out in the morning to go for a long distance run, because I really enjoy running. But as someone who has vision and hearing, I really need someone who can actually run alongside me or in front of me at the pace that I need it, which is not a slow pace. And I need them to be able to navigate, to be able to prompt me if there's any obstacles, overhanging branches, pedestrians, cyclists. So it's a bit of a safety thing for me to have that person there. But that's the task that a support worker might do, the thing that you put on paper. But I think what really came to me when I was doing this work of meeting people and trying to figure out who this person could be was that I had 2 support workers, and I gave them both a shot. And I won't use their real names. One I'm going to call Amy, and the other I'm going to call Millie. So I had these 2 people, very similar age, very similar background, similar interest in running and being active as well. But if I think about those 2 people, one of them I felt really comfortable with, and I left the shift feeling like, yes, okay, this person, I feel like I can work with this person. Meanwhile, the other person, Millie, I walked away from that shift feeling exhausted, drained. I felt unheard. I felt like I wasn't being seen as a human being. All of these sorts of things. None of it was intentional. Both of them were so well-intentioned, decent human beings. But what made the difference was that when I met with Amy, she took the time to get to know me. And when I say she took the time, I mean she would ask me questions. She seemed to be curious about who I was. She seemed to be open to learning about different people's experiences without putting her assumptions into it, without assuming that she knew the best way to do something or the only way to do something. So she kind of held back in some ways in her own values and what she thought was right or wrong, and she just took the lead from me. And so we would have some great conversations, and it felt really equal and even. And I was equally curious about who she was, and she was curious about who I was. And it felt like I was being valued, like I had something that I could offer her. She wasn't only offering something to me. But then if I think about Millie, she was a lovely human being, but I remember getting into the car on the first shift to do the trial run, and this whole 2-hour shift, she just talked at me the whole time, like did not leave a single gap in between, didn't ask me many questions about who I was, what I was interested in, anything about my family background, what I do for work, just no questions at all, just talked at me the whole time. And it was almost like she just saw me as this blank canvas, and that she was there to mentor me, to coach me, to like be inspirational for me. And, you know, like she was giving me all of these inspirational quotes and like, you know, trying to cajole me into being really energetic. And I was just like, this is not, like, I just felt like I was exhausted by the end of that shift. And, you know, like, I know that Millie had the best intentions and she was probably anxious herself, but I think the underlying message, the underlying sort of vibe, I can't even explain it, but there was something about it which was that to me it was like she saw herself as the professional and me as this client that didn't have anything to offer, like no value, or like it was like she saw herself as the expert and I was just the thing that had to be coached. And I really struggled with that. Like I know that there are lots of people who, especially when they have a lifetime of living with disability, are interacting with professionals, paid people in their life all the time. And it is so easy to get into this repetitive kind of idea that professionals are the experts, they know best, I just have to take their instructions, I just have to follow them. And that's not the kind of thing that really gives me value or meaning in my life. Like the things that are important to me won't be the same things that are important to Millie or the same things that are important to Amy. And so rather than them deciding what they think is best for me, what I really needed was Amy who took the time, didn't feel like this silence with unnecessary chatter. She kind of just took my lead. And there were times when I wasn't feeling up for a chat and she was just totally chill and happy to drive me and go for my run so that I could get in the right headspace. And there wasn't that weird thing of me trying to make Millie feel better about herself in some way. Like I felt like I was constantly trying to reassure her or make her feel like that, yeah, she's doing a good job, yeah, cool. Whereas with Amy, I didn't really have to do that. It was just so natural and it felt like that we had this mutual respect.
Sounds like for Millie, you almost had to perform. You know, you had to be on. And this is something that I'm sure you all deal with is you're in someone's home, but it's your workplace. And that balance is really difficult. But what we have to remember, and I'm specifically talking especially about non-disabled support workers, is that this is your home and your life, and you are the expert. And I just want to quickly link it to the history of disability, if that's all right, Ellen. Something that I'm particularly passionate about. What Ellen's talking about is when people with disability lived large scale in institutions, doctors were seen as the only ones who knew what was right. This is called the medical model of disability. And if you've not heard about these theories, it can sound a bit scary, but I promise you it will give you this incredible understanding of why the world is the way it is and what preceded it. And doctors, the medical model says disabled people are wrong, and they're broken. There's the ideal and perfect body, and their body is different. And so it's wrong and needs to be cured. And that's been happening for, hundreds of years. And in the 1960s, it was a disabled fella in North America, I can't remember if it was America or Canada, who coined the term the social model of disability, which actually turns that pointing finger outwards and says, yeah, I have something about my body is different. We might call it an impairment, we might not. But the fact that my community and the systems around me aren't built for me, that's the real problem. I don't need to be fixed, actually. I am who I am for whatever reason. And what we need to do, especially as non-disabled support workers, is to be curious about why our communities are built the way they are. As Ellen said, most of our communities were built when people were institutionalised. So there were no panels with disabled people on it. That's why you hear so much about disability now. We're about to run out of time, but I really urge you all to learn about the history of disability and to look into the social model, the medical model of disability, and the human rights model of disability, because it will change, there you go, it will change your practice completely. And it's a really important part of being a support worker. I just want to quickly go over our key messages, which I hope, this is a 30-minute talk when Ellen's just written a PhD and I have a master's, and we could talk about this probably on this stage for about 4 days straight without sleeping or breathing or eating. But if you can take away these key points, which are disabled people are not broken, and it is our responsibility to recognise that we live in ableist societies. We are all ableist. I'm not trying to offend you. It's just true. It's how we're all raised, whether you're disabled or not. That most behaviour is communication, again, whether you're disabled or not. My hands are shaking right now, and that's telling you that I'm pretty nervous being up here. So everything that we do, or most things that we do, show other people how we're feeling, and we're trying to tell them something. It takes energy to have support workers. So think about your impact. Am I bringing the right parts of myself to this shift? Am I a very religious person? And that's a beautiful thing. But am I supporting someone who isn't religious? And maybe it's not appropriate to talk about my faith in this context. And just a side note, that's a whole thing, but my cousin gets prayed over a lot. And for some people that can be quite distressing, because again, that reiterates the idea that people are broken and wrong. Self-reflect, think about, again, who am I? What are my influences? Why do I think and feel the way I think and feel? What have my influences been? And the person I'm supporting will have had different influences. So what do I need to draw on, and what do I need to set aside? And our role is to look, listen, learn, and believe disabled people when they tell you what their life looks like. Because if you're a non-disabled support worker, some of the things that disabled people have to deal with every day, they will shock you. Thank you very much.